podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welsh rugby is in crisis. This week on Wrap, we do a post-mortem on Wales against Australia as we ask, where on earth do Wales go from here? And is it time to say goodbye to Warren Gatland? All that and more on this week's edition of the Wrap podcast.
You're listening to Wrap, the Welsh Regional Rugby Appreciation Podcast.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Wrap podcast. I'm Jamie and join me as always is James. Hello James.
How we doing?
Good. Now Lee and Harley can't be with us this week, but we have Martin from Saucepans and Sidesteps and the SRC podcast. Hello Martin.
Evening.
You seem very excitable.
I had a big intro. You got to be excited for that.
No, we'll wait till we start talking about Wales. Let's see how excited you are then. And then, of course, we have Dan Pierce from Cardiff Central podcast. Hello, Dan. How are we?
Yeah, great. Cheers to Harley for another hospital pass of coming on this pod after it was quite a bad Cardiff performance last time, and now Wales have stuffed me right up. So great.
He's timed it well, hasn't he? Fair play. Oh dear. Okay, let's get into some news. Just a little bit of news. Obviously, big news that's broke today is that Wales have lost the most experienced member of their autumn squad, as Adam Beard has been released from the Wales camp due to a knee injury sustained just 7 minutes into last weekend's loss to Australia. Big blow for Wales. We know that Adam Beard's a Marmite player. He does divide opinion, but I don't think people understand or appreciate just how viable he is to Wales and the Ospreys. It's a big blow, James, isn't it?
Oh, massively. And what's more sad is if the rumours going around are correct, we might have seen him play his last game in Ospreys jersey.
Oh no.
That's
a shame.
If the injury is as bad as we think, and the deal to Montpellier is already done, we won't see him in Ospreys jersey again, which is more heartbreaking to me.
Yeah, because you don't get a proper send-off then. That's the problem, isn't it? You know, when you're out injured like that. So.
As Dan has pointed out many times, the more Ospreys players who are not there to torture him on New Year's Day, the better.
I will say that I didn't wish an ACL injury.
No, of course, I would never say that.
I'd just like to add that,
accident.
but
No,
2025 might start slightly happier now. I don't know.
Yeah, so a big blow to Ospreys and Wales. Adam Beard out with a knee injury. Other bit of news then. Ospreys have signed a 19-year-old Wales qualified New Zealander by the name of Ieuan Cornelius. No, me neither. James, do you want to tell us about Ieuan Cornelius, please, for any Ospreys fans who might be wondering who he is?
So there'd been rumblings. There had been rumblings that there was a kid in the senior academy who was Australian. There was an Australian kicking about. And we hadn't heard anything until we saw the team sheet for the development game where you saw Ieuan Cornelius on the bench. He was born in New Zealand and is half Maori, half Welsh. Spent some of his childhood in Swansea, so he's a Pontardawe boy, with his dad being a Morriston lad. Played for Morriston, played for Aberavon. He played a bit in Penclawdd as well. But he's spent the majority of his time in Australia. 6'2" at 19 years old, background in athletics. Most recently has been at Bond University in Australia, coached by Rico Gia, and as under 20s level, been in the men's Elite 7 setup, Queensland Reds, pre-World Cup trained with Eddie Jones and the Wallabies. But most importantly, he feels Welsh. So he's very connected to his sort of Welsh side, grew up supporting Wales and grew up supporting the Ospreys. Speaking to people within the squad, he's been flying into everyone at training. He's a big lad and impressed on his debut against the Dragons on Saturday. So it's certainly one keeping an eye on. It's great that the Excels program is working and we're bringing these players back over. Look, I'm not going to say he's going to set the world on fire, but it's not every day you do go out and get in Welsh qualified, half Maori,
Yeah.
6'2", heavy set lads, and his highlights are really fun. Spent a lot of time in sevens, so has got that knack for making an outside break and got the eye for a line break. So yeah, look, really exciting. Wish the lad all the best, and really hope he kicks on over the next few years.
Sounds interesting. One to keep an eye on. You mentioned the Dragons there. There was a development game on Saturday at St Helens. Dragons won at 38-17. So a very successful period for the Dragons with these development games. Harry Rees-Weldon, 4 tries in 2 games. So one to keep an eye on there. He might break into the Dragons senior team soon. So yeah, good stuff from the Dragons. Matt, you got something you want to add to the news section, I believe?
Yes, I do. For anyone that doesn't know from this podcast, obviously, I'm a member of the Crease 16 board, the Scarlet Supporters Trust, and we've embarked on a project to record every match and player that represented the Scarlet's ladies seniors team. But, there's not a lot of records out there and we could do with some help. So if there's anyone out there who has represented the Scarlet's ladies or knows someone that has, can you please get in touch by emailing info@crease16.cymru. And just because it's me, and I can't go too many weeks without mentioning the community, the Doer Shield is back this Friday. The knockout rounds are kicking off. So, big time of year. Get down to Sporty District. Go for it.
Absolutely. Lovely stuff. Okay, then. We're going to have to talk about Sunday now, aren't we? We are going to have to talk about it, unfortunately. Another dark day for Welsh rugby. So, it finished Wales 20, Australia 52. 8 tries to 2. Wales conceded 3 tries and 21 points, while Australia were down to 14 men. It was grim, boys, wasn't it? Let's be honest, it was pretty grim. I knew that, well, I think we all knew that Wales were underdogs going into this run. I don't think any of us really saw Australia putting 52 points on us. Well, I certainly didn't anyway. I'll come to you, Dan, first. It's difficult to know where to start, isn't it? What are your thoughts on Sunday and what unfolded?
Yeah, I think I agree. I didn't expect a defeat at that magnitude. It was a weird feeling at full time where you weren't even sort of angry or disappointed, just a bit numb really at this point after so many defeats in a row. It's just, I think the frustrating thing is that, what was that Wales performance? There was nothing identity wise, nothing sort of tactical, nothing, no little nuances. If you say, what went well for Wales, it's difficult to pluck anything beyond the scrum, which was one very good positive, but that was it.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's even difficult to put your finger on, what went badly as such. It's just that we're just second best to everybody we're playing against at the moment in pretty much every facet of the game. We're not putting pressure on opposition teams. We're not looking like breaking any lines. We're not looking like forcing many turnovers. We're not looking like stopping teams once they stress the defense even a little bit. The line out, once one thing goes wrong, that's it. There is no more line out anymore.
Yeah, capitulated again, didn't it, on Sunday?
And ultimately, it's difficult because you look at the players and they are very young and they're very inexperienced, and they don't necessarily have to win. I don't think anybody looks at where Wales are at the moment and thinks, we should be top 5 in the world and challenging for Six Nations and, coming away with winning records from autumn series. But at least there should be something to say, I can see where we're going, or I can see that maybe, in 6 months we can win a game playing this way, or even just looking at the Six Nations and thinking, okay, we might actually beat Italy or Scotland, or, maybe we can put something together that we can have a dig against England or Ireland at home. There's nothing there. There's nothing, other than the scrum, which that's a one-off as well for Wales. There hasn't been a consistent positive. It was just, it went very well on Sunday. There's nothing to say, right, we can build around this or we can develop. But, it is as empty as it's been. I've recently turned 30. I'll give myself recently still. And and so those sort of dark days, late 90s, early 2000s, I was a bit young for that. So, this is as dark as it's been for my sort of generation. And there is, nothing to cling on to at all, really.
Yeah, you're lucky, see, because I was born in the 80s, but growing up in the 90s, I'm a 90s child, and I remember the 90s very well. So to me, it's like we have gone back to the dark days of the 90s. It's pretty grim. James, your thoughts? on Sunday. Did you expect that scoreline against Australia?
Well, I was the pessimistic one on the pod last week,
You was, yeah.
and said that I just can't see Wales competing. Or I could see Wales competing, but I can't see us putting anything down that showed a marker. And I said I was quite vocal in the WhatsApp chat early on and said this is just spineless. It's pathetic. This is not me calling out players, right? I don't think any player goes out on that field and gives less than 100%. But, and I'm sure we'll come on to this, we're being set up, the players are being set up to fail.
Yeah.
So, they're almost going into battle without guns. Go full World War II Russian army. They're going into battle without guns. And you can have the most talented soldier in the world, but you're going to lose a firefight if you're running straight at bullets. That's what it feels like, and it's things like not capitalizing on a team being a man down, right? 2 weeks in a row, we've conceded multiple tries while two big players have been off the field.
Yeah.
I didn't expect that scoreline, but I also did. That's how I feel. Like nothing in that game surprised me. Nothing in that game said I've learned anything new about Wales. I always knew that this capitulation was coming. I thought it was everyone's saying, "Oh yeah, but we played a bit well against Fiji." Did we though? We put some stuff together. Yeah, we put some nice things together in the backs, but did we? Did we really? I say to my students all the time, hindsight is the most exact science in the world. It's really easy to look back on that Fiji game and cherry pick the two tries that we scored that were really nice. We put it through the hands, but we were also battered off the ball, and they did well to execute under huge physical threats coming at us, which is what happened this week. There are positives. I thought Archie Griffin and Gareth Tom. I thought that front row, both front rows, were actually really well in the tight.
Mm.
I think James Botham at 6 went really well. I think that gives us. I think now his future international lies at 6 for me.
So you have him ahead of Plumtree then? So you're saying?
I wouldn't necessarily say I have him ahead of Plumtree. I think it gives us depth at that position. I think it gives us an option.
Okay.
I think him and Morgan worked really well together. And I'm getting bored of saying how good Jack Morgan was every week.
He was rated 5 out of 10 in
Yeah, well, he was. Yeah,
Wales
sorry,
Online.
5 out of 10 by Wales Online. One less than Gareth Thomas, who also had a very good game in the loose. But look, we're scraping bottom of the barrel, right? In terms of looking for positives, and my overarching feeling is this group don't deserve what's happening to them, because I think there's a genuinely core of really good talent here that are being set up to fail by the coaching staff and by senior management at the WIU.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, there were some positives to take from this game. You've mentioned Archie Griffin there. I thought he did really well, showed up Angus Bell, to be fair. Nicky Smith made an impact when he came on. I think he has to start against South Africa, to be honest, on Saturday. Tom Rogers, I was very surprised about Tom Rogers. So I've spoken about Tom Rogers before. His last appearance for Wales against South Africa, there was that Rugby World Cup warm-up. He looked like a competition winner. He was just awful. He looked completely out of his depth. And when he was starting for Wales this week, I was thinking, how is he going to go? Fair play. He's really improved. He's been excellent for the Scarlets this season. And he was excellent again on Saturday. He was so good in the air. Yeah. And that try-saving tackle on Samu Karevi was outstanding. He was by far Wales' best player on Sunday, wasn't he?
I was speaking to Gav from Dragon's Lair. I was like, for fuck's sake, Tom Rogers, because that first carry, he got held up for the maul, and we get turned over, and I'm like, oh, I can't deal with this now, Tom. I was like, please. And then He proved me wrong. Fair play. And put my hand up and say I had
Yeah.
low expectations for him. I think as
Same.
did a lot of people. And fair play. He proved me wrong. What his next step now is he's got to do it consistently and nail down a shirt.
Yeah.
So it's all well and good doing it against Australia, but can he go and do it against South Africa?
Yeah, it's a fair point. He had to come off with cramp, I believe, because I know Campese was going nuts, wasn't he? Calling it a batshit decision why Gatland took him off, but he had cramp, so he had to come off. But you got to give credit where it's due. I thought he was really, really good. Surprised me, and yeah, he definitely deserves to start against South Africa. Mart, what are your takeaways from Saturday?
There's not much really more can add. I'm not as positive as you guys are regarding the scrum. I thought Griffin especially was lucky on a few occasions. I think more than anything, we lacked a lot of leadership on that pitch. Losing Beard early was obviously a knock, and scum for that first 35 minutes. I like you said about Tom Rogers being a competition winner. In defence, he felt like that because he was just letting everything walk over him or go through him. It was just so uncharacteristic. And then I don't even think Wainwright. He didn't even have the greatest game either, to be fair to him, and he normally pounds teams. So fine, he had a few moments. Like, don't get me wrong, most of the players in this team did. You just look trying to watch back over. You're trying to pick things out, just trying to be positive, and you really are struggling. Like, the only positive I look over, I like the way that Costello and Ben Thomas work together once they do get a flow. As much as that pains me to say, because I want to see Sam and Eddie together. Tom Rogers, yeah, he was outstanding. That, like you just mentioned, that first carry where he was held up, I was more annoyed with Winnett and Bevan just standing there letting it happen. Get stuck in, try and force him to the ground. But yeah, there's not many in that squad. Jack Morgan, you've already mentioned, that you can really say, yeah, they had a really good game. They deserve to keep their shirt 100%. And I think that's the point of where we're at, which is quite sad at the minute. I do believe we are being set up to fail. I mean, the substitutions, it just don't make sense a lot of the time. Taking off key players at certain times. I understand changing things up, but when you're just making wholesale changes for the sake of it, what are you trying to do? You're just creating so much chaos that you're already losing the battle on that front, and you're making it even worse for yourself.
Fair enough, yeah. I think on Wainwright, he doesn't look 100%. We should remember he has come back from a long injury layoff. He just looks a little bit undercut for me. But yeah, I do agree with what you're saying. I thought Roger Williams did all right off the bench, fair play. I mean, the game was long gone by then, but I thought he did well. I thought Ellis Bevan was poor, actually. A couple of dumb offside penalties. But fair play to Roger.
Arguably should have gone for a yellow as well.
Yeah, could have done.
For the hit on Nick White.
Yeah,
which ultimately forced Nick White off as well.
Yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong, it was on Nick White. So
yeah, exactly.
He should be applauded. But we got to be consistent.
Yeah, but it's just so hard to take positives in there out of a thumping like that. Dan, there's a lot of talk about these players. I think Peter Jackson said they're grossly inferior to the players that Gatland had previously. Do you think these players are actually good enough for international rugby? Do we need to keep the faith of them, or are there certain individuals who you look at and go, I don't think you're a top-end international player? How do you look at this squad?
Right now, I think the majority of the players, no, in normal circumstances, you wouldn't have them near test level. To be honest, there's a couple of players there that really shouldn't be regular club players yet. They should be still sort of working their way into their first 15 at club level. But it's a symptomatic of where we are with Welsh rugby at the moment. The squad is where we are because I think you can probably go through and there's maybe 4 or 5 players who are top level international players, and particularly when they're fit. You look at Dewi Lake, I think. Wainwright when he's fit, Jack Morgan, Gareth Anscombe when he's properly fit. I don't know whether he'll ever be quite fit enough again to be in that category, but when he's fit and firing, Will Rowlands, who I don't know if he looks heavy to me, maybe coming back from France, maybe he's been asked to put a bit of weight on, or he doesn't look quite as dynamic as,
No, I agree.
when he
Yeah,
was regularly in the team beforehand. But outside that, a lot of those guys are younger guys with potential. And that's like the majority. I think you could probably name 75% of the squad. You probably put them in that sort of category where they're, 10 caps or less, and really they should still be learning their trade at club level, where, getting into the wider symptomatic issues of Welsh rugby, they're not, experienced in top level rugby, getting in those situations that prepare them for test level enough because of the dramatic underfunding from the Welsh Rugby Union. So to answer the question, the only thing we can do is keep the faith. And this is where I think the Union and Gatland in particular have gone really wrong since the World Cup, because as soon as the build up to the Six Nations earlier this year came, and it was obvious that the squad was undergoing a massive overhaul and we were losing so many caps and so much experience, they should have said, right, guys, give us a year. We're going to back these young guys. We're going to lose a couple of games, but we're going to try and play in a way that you can see where we're going. And they haven't done that. He's chopped and changed in each international window so far. Very different squads, very different like aims and styles of play. With you look at the different centre partnerships, and we've had big guys and little guys, and we've had two big guys and two little guys, and it's been all over the shop. So I think what they should have done is just said, look, we're young, we're developing, stick with us. They haven't done that. They've put pressure on themselves, and now they're sort of reaping what they've sown on that front, really.
Yeah, it's a good point. We'll talk about Gatland in a bit. Mike Forshaw, do you think he should get a bit more scrutiny with how our defence has been? Because he seems to be escaping that. I see a lot towards Gatland, I see a lot towards Jonathan Humphreys, but I think Mike Forshaw's getting off a little bit lightly, in my personal view. Anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah. Every single one of the coaches in that coaching setup needs to be getting the same amount of pressure put on them, not just Gatland, not just Humphreys, like you said. You just look at the way we set up. I mean, we were so narrow in that game against an Australian team that likes to play wide, likes to run it. There's ways, the common sense. Same as just the covering of the backfield, just everything felt amateurish. Now, I'm not saying these boys are amateurs, but the way that game was played, the way they was set up, I mean, everything was against them. There was one point, Tom Rogers made a lovely catch, tracking backs on like 50, was it Blair? Must have been Blair Murray who was on the left wing, where he was inside of the 15 when a crossfield kick came in, and he had to track back 10 meters. He took the ball, but the fact that he was inside the 15 when, it's just so strange, knowing the way Australia set themselves up to play, that we would put ourselves in that position. And to be fair, Australia got a lot of ground from it.
Yeah, they did. I thought Blair Murray was disappointing. I have to say, I thought he had a good debut against Fiji, but he didn't back it up. And defensively, he does look suspect. I thought he really showed his defensive frailties in this game.
To be fair,
Again, go on, Matt.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I saw Blair Murray basically being given that whole 15-meter channel and say, defend it on your own, especially in that first half. He had no help from no one. Same as when Rogers made that try saver on Karevi. He was marshalling three men himself because no one else got involved. This is, and I'm talking, I think it was Anscombe out on the wing, like I already mentioned, him defensively in that first 30-35 was poor. Murray was working his arse off. He was going 100 miles an hour, and there's no wonder he couldn't get there to everyone. He did not quite have the impact he did against Fiji, but you're going from Fiji to Australia. It doesn't matter what Fiji or what Australia side you are. You make that transition. It's never going to be the same.
James, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, again, I don't think necessarily. I think it's one of. But I agree with you, Jamie. I think Blair Murray probably had a poor game in defence, but then also you come back to the notion of these players are being set up to fail. In terms of this defensive system, I think this defensive system is not giving him the best chance to succeed as a defender.
So that comes back to Forshaw then, what I was saying earlier. Yeah.
But it also leaves the likes of, there's huge gaps in the centres, right? And that's not because neither Ben Thomas or Max Llewellyn are bad defenders. It's because the way they're being coached, there's dog legs, there's wide gaps. You look around, it's a bit like England right now. Their frailties lie around the ruck area. They're so poor around the ruck area that every team is exploiting it. Are them players bad defenders? No, of course not. It's just the way they're being coached means that around the ruck area, teams are exploiting it and making yards. And exactly what Martin said about Blair Murray and probably that outside defence channel is that a team like Australia who's set up to get the ball wide or have players like Tom Wright cut back inside into big gaps are of course going to exploit it. So it's yeah, I think I echo Martin's sentiments. This entire coaching group needs to be put under scrutiny, and I think we all work in a KPI centered environment, right? Are them coaches seriously hitting KPIs? For example, I had my probation meeting in my job today, right, where my KPIs were set out to me when I signed my contract. When Gatland signed his contract, it seems to me that Gatland sort of made up his own KPIs and has been given the chance to move them around. That's what it feels like, because any other job, in professional sport or not, you'd be lambasted for these results. Yeah, you'd be hauled in front of a disciplinary panel.
So the attendance for this game was 56,000, compared to 2 years ago against the same opposition, which was Pivac's last game in charge, with 67,000. Dan, is there a danger of the Welsh public being just apathetic now? Because it seems to be they're starting to vote with their feet. And look, I know some people say, well, it's a Sunday game and that doesn't help. That is true, but it's a bit worrying now, isn't it, that we can't sell out the stadium. Fiji wasn't a sellout in this game, 56,000. It is a bit concerning, isn't it, that the public are just going to be apathetic to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to what I said earlier, I'm a bit young for those dark days of the 19s and 2000s, but obviously my old man lived right through them. My family is fairly rugby oriented. My old man tells me about going to watch Cardiff Ponty on Boxing Days, how good days were. My uncle's a former professional back in the 90s, and but I grew up being taken to Ninian Park in the early 2000s, going to watch Cardiff City play, because Welsh rugby at the time was not something I was interested in. So my first sort of, as a 10-year-old, first proper awareness of rugby was when we won the Grand Slam 2005. So that's what you're risking there, is this next generation of supporters. If, like, I've got a little boy now, he's nearly 2, in a couple of years, if he says, I want to go to watch sports or whatever, it's like, well, we're not going to watch Welsh rugby. That's a dreadful day out. They'll probably lose. The stadium will be half empty. They'll be on an awkward kickoff time because TV's not interested in us, so we get shunted to sort of the awkward Sunday slots, and then we'll go down to watch Wales play football or some other sport if cricket managed to recover at some point. So that's the big risk here, is that not only do they become apathetic, but you just lose this next generation. And then there's the short-term issue as well, is that, is it 30-odd thousand seats that have not been sold over the last 2 games, plus a decent number of freebies that I'm aware of. How much revenue is that lost? A couple of £100,000 worth of revenue lost there straight away. Add in competition money and stuff like that when the Six Nations comes back round. Yeah, you're struggling big time there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you can't blame the players. They are given everything. This is a young team. And, I do agree with what you're saying, James. They're not given the right tools and they're being thrown to the lions a bit. But they just look so underpowered now, Dan, don't they? Compared to other test nations. And I don't know how you fix that. How do you fix that issue of being underpowered and not having the mentality and the power to take on these big sides? I just don't know how you fix it in a short space of time.
It's identity, I think. You can understand, each team has their strengths and their weaknesses, and at the moment, Wales aren't a particularly big side. They're not particularly powerful, but there is a lot of individual talent there. There's a lot of exciting X factor in that back line. The forwards, I think, are particularly highly skilled. You know, we sometimes get criticised in Wales for lads being sort of gym monkeys in inverted commas and not being good enough rugby players. But there's a lot of good skilled footballers in that forward pack and particularly through the back line. So you can design you can design a system that works for you. It might not work every time, especially at test level where being powerful is so key. You know, you look at Australia in that period when they were down to 40 men and they just tightened up and went direct. And there's not always a lot you can do about that. But in between times, you can play a style of rugby that suits the players you've got. And, looking at talking about Mike Forshaw, then like the defensive system, it can, if you're going to pick Botham and Morgan, you can go hard at the breakdown. You can put Nicky Smith in there potentially at loose head as well. You can get over the ball and slow them down, or you can pick Eddie James, say at 13, and with Tom Rogers there as well, and bring a lot of pace out of that back line and really put them under pressure with your blitz. We're not doing anything really. We're not a team that has an identity. There's certainly not an identity that links to the players that we've got. Saying about Tom Rogers, who did play really well, but he was still asked to do a lot of what Mason Grady was doing, coming into midfield and carrying into dead ends and making ground there. James Botham played really well at blindside, but we were still trying to take them on physically, and he's not, he hasn't got the sheer size of if you picked a Plumtree there or a Shunza there. So, these guys are doing as well as they can individually, but they're not being given a system that works for them as a team at all. There's no identity. There's nothing to build around there. That's what should have happened this year. Is we should have picked a group of players that were roughly on the same page, had similar attributes. Or if somebody got injured, somebody was coming in that was apples for apples, and you can build around that. But that just simply hasn't happened, and we're stuck in a quagmire of just sort of no man's land.
Yeah, fair enough. Matt, anything to add to that?
Not much. I can't think of anything positive really to add, so I'm going to try and be short and sweet. We've got talent. There's so much individual talent in this squad. That, you sort out that culture, that identity. I don't know if you boys are the same, but I'm still, obviously growing up in the 90s, I'm still of the belief of, I don't care if we win. I just want to play well. I want to see that Welsh flair. I want to see us attack sides properly.
It's test match rugby though, Matt. Of course, it's all about winning, isn't it? We're in the results-based business.
Yeah, but what do we really get from winning? These friendlies, the Six Nations, 100%. And like I've said previously, guys, Six Nations, World Cup, happy to go for it. But these are glorified friendlies. We don't get anything for winning these games. I want to see us playing a style of rugby we can be proud of. And once we've got that down, the results will eventually come. You got to get your playing style sorted first before anything else.
Just to remind you, if Georgia had beaten Italy, Wales would have been 12th in the world rankings this week. So, there is a lot to be gained from winning, and it breeds confidence, doesn't it? This is a team that just don't know how to win. And it's difficult. The Welsh public, they pay good money. They want to see a winning team.
They want to be entertained. They
do, but they want to see results as well.
Yeah, I'm away on this one because this is an argument that grates on me, right? I get your argument, Mark, of playing the Welsh way, right? And you look back to that 05 Grand Slam squad and they played some lovely rugby there. You go back to 03, the way we were chucking the ball about there. But rugby was in a different place then, right? Wales are currently not in a position to go from where they are mentally, physically, and emotionally to just start chucking the ball around, because you end up with situations like the Costello intercept, or you start forcing things that are going to impact negatively, right? So you're going to start forcing knock-ons, you're going to start forcing forward passes. What we need to do is have the key aspects of the game in a place where we are comfortable, right? And I say this as someone who as an Ospreys fan, right? We don't play flashy rugby. Yeah. When Toby Booth took over, he said that what we're going to do is we're going to get the key aspects of our game, our scrum, our line out, right, to a point where they are beyond functional. They're going to give us platforms to go out and score tries. So he did, right? And then the evolution comes from there, which I'm still waiting for 5 years later. That's another thing. But you have to get certain aspects of the game right first before we have that license to go out and throw it around. I fully empathize with it. And again, I'm even younger than Dan, right? My first, proper rugby memory was the '08 Grand Slam, right? Or maybe 2007 World Cup, but the '08 Grand Slam, right? We didn't necessarily play flashy rugby there, right? We played effective rugby. Right? I will always maintain that effective winning rugby beats out flashy 50-50. We might win, we might not. We might go down in a blaze of glory rugby, right? South Africa have won 2 World Cups in it. Let's not get away from that fact.
No,
But that's also the South African way of playing. I'm not talking about literally throwing everything to the ground, offload for fun. I just want to see some strike plays. I want to see us try something because we're not trying anything. We're just shifting the ball and going for it and just, taking random, crossfield kicks and chips ahead as and when. There's no structure to anything. But yeah, I do understand, scrum line of set piece does come first, but that doesn't mean you can't try things at the same time.
okay. So we had a question from a listener, Martin. He's a friend of the pod. He listens to the show. He asks this. I'll come to you, Dan, on this because it's quite an interesting question. He says, with us having a young squad and trying to develop a style of rugby, should the WRU follow Scotland's example and play more tier 2 nations like Spain or Portugal rather than playing and trying to develop against top teams? Should we have done a Scotland and played, tier 2 teams or under-strength teams just to get a bit of confidence for winning? Or what do you think about that argument?
It's a double-edged sword to a degree.
Come on.
You've got the positives are that you can win those games and that you can develop sort of patterns of play. The sort of flip side to that is that the step up then when you go back to tier 1 is quite marked. So does that necessarily transfer? I do think Wales would have been better off playing at least one sort of tier 2 S side this autumn. I don't. This game against South Africa, I don't really understand why we've decided to chuck that in there. Obviously, financial is probably the major driver behind it, but from a rugby perspective, I just think that we're not. Surely, at the time they were sorting out these fixtures, nobody in the WRU was looking at that and thinking, "Oh yeah, we'll give the Springboks a really good game by that point." But yeah, I think just generally, it to get the players to a level where they're comfortable winning games and having that experience of being a more dominant side or being a more settled side, it has to come back to the clubs to a degree as well. They have to be competing regularly at a higher level. They have to be winning regularly, and it's as much as I will get onto sort of coaching chat, and I think there needs to be a change in that regard. We are hamstringing ourselves a little bit by not getting properly competitive at club level before stepping up to test level. It's difficult to develop yourself as a player at test level.
Fair enough. Marty, come on then. So you don't agree with that then, no?
No, I do. I'm just having some issues technically my end.
All right, I thought you was disagreeing with the question.
No, I'm getting angry at my own internet. I've just popped something in the chat for you boys, but no, I've got family staying and it's siphoning my bloody what little Wi-Fi I have, so I keep dropping in and out. It's driving me mad.
Okay. Fair. I thought you responded to the question. James, should we have done a Scotland?
If I talk about Scotland, people online will get very annoyed at me because they know my thoughts on Scotland and the way
You're a Scotland hater, are you?
I'm not a Scotland hater, I'm just a Scotland administrative hater. Scotland do this all the time, right? They go into the autumn and they play Canada, North Macedonia, and Uzbekistan, right? And then everyone tips them to have a great Six Nations. They underperform there, and we're back in the cycle, right? I'm not being disingenuous. It's just what happens, right? I do agree that I think we definitely should have played one tier two nation. I think logistically, the one that makes sense is playing Japan. We're going out there to tour next summer. Play Japan now. But lo and behold, this is what we've got. There is an element of you test the marker of where you are as you play the best in the world, right? The marker of where you are in the URC is how you perform against the Bulls, Leinster, people like this. So it's exactly the same in Test rugby. There's so many variables too. We should have played this person, right? England are in a similar position. They're on a 5-game losing streak, right? But they are going to come out this autumn a better team, having lost so narrowly to three amazing nations, three of the best rugby playing nations in the world. There are ways you can look at it. So, no, we shouldn't be like Scotland because, they're losers who've never won anything ever.
Thank you for that balanced viewpoint, James. It's much appreciated.
As always, I am the most balanced.
Oh dear. Okay, just a reminder before we move on that we are available on all the usual platforms, Apple, Spotify, and our YouTube channel, where we are aiming for 1,000 subscribers. And so far, we are on 991. So not too far away. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe, like the video, and help us grow the channel because we'd really appreciate that. Okay, let's move on to Mr. Gatland, shall we? It's now 6 wins from 23 tests, a win rate of just 27%. Any lower, you'd be a Dragons head coach. I can say that I'm a long-suffering Dragons fan. So, did any of you see the interviews that he did after the game on TNT and S4C? Because he did one with Sarah Elgan and he did one with Lauren Jenkins. He got a lot of criticism on social media because he appeared to be smiling a lot. It's something that I noticed. He was very cool, very relaxed about the situation. And he said several times that he's comfortable. He's comfortable with whatever decision is going to happen. Earlier in the week, he talked about being on the beach with a glass of wine and he'd be comfortable, with any decision the union makes. But then I watched the press conference that he did after the game with the journalists. And it was a very different Warren Gatland. He seemed like a man resigned to his fate. I have to say, he was very downbeat. He was talking about doing what's best for his family. You'll consider his position. When he asked, does he still want to be in charge? He was like, I don't know. And, listening to Scrum 5 podcast and the Wales Online podcast, they were suggesting that it felt like he was coming to the end. So I just thought it was really interesting when you look at his post-match interviews on TV compared to how he was in that press conference. I noticed a remarkable shift of tone from him, I have to say. And I think a lot of credit should go out to reporters like Sarah Elgan and Lauren Jenkins. They did quiz Gatland pretty well. Matt Southcombe as well, Gav Griffiths. Sarah Elgan's interview with Dowie Lake was really good. Thought Dowie showed a lot of passion. I did laugh, though. I did have a little bit of a chuckle at that interview because Sarah Elgan says to him, 11 straight defeats, Wales' worst run ever. You don't need me to tell you that, when she literally had just told him that. So it's a little bit of irony there. It did make me chuckle. But how did you feel about Warren Gatland's comments then at the end again? We've all seen them. We've all read them. Does it feel like it is coming to an end now?
Finally, yeah, it does. And I know you boys have heard some of my opinions over the last week. I have never rated Gatland as a coach. Yes, he's a good manager, but he's only as good as the boys below him. And right now they are not doing very good whatsoever. But yeah, the writing's on the wall. I'm seeing things that there's a break clause after the Six Nations. So realistically, we should be setting out to find that new coaching team now. Whether or not he stays in the meantime, that is the question. And quite frankly, where he's talking about he's being relaxed with whatever decision make. It doesn't matter what decision they make. He's already rolling in it. He's already fleeced the WRU and the Welsh public for God knows how much. And that is the words they have to use, God knows, because some of the figures I've seen people throw about are just stupid.
So I'll just pick up on that point you said. So Peter Jackson was on Radio Wales this morning, and he revealed that there's a break clause in Warren Gatland's contract at the end of the Six Nations. So here's a question for you then, Dan. There's a decision to be made now, isn't it? A big decision. Do you let Gatland limp on to the Six Nations, or do you call it quits now? If you're the WRU, put yourself in Abby Turney's high heels. What would you be doing?
Well, I think if I was in Abby Tierney's shoes, I'd just be staring at the ceiling, pretending not to notice what was going on. But I think it's a no-brainer there. If you're even half considering waiting till the end of the Six Nations, you've just got to act now. Put him on gardening leave, wait for that break clause to act, and then kick him out at the end of the Six Nations. I struggle to see any sort of coherent argument around keeping Gatland and the entire coaching ticket in place at this point now. I don't. There's not really like a continuity element there because he's still relatively newish in the roles, particularly relatively new with this group of players. He, in terms of how he looked after the game, he reminds me of me on Football Manager when I've just lost the game and I've sort of slammed the laptop shut and I'm like, can I be bothered to go back to play that game or not? And that's you have to give yourself a bit of time to think about it, but. Ultimately, I think he looks like somebody who, when he loads back up, is starting a new save somewhere else. I think he's out of touch, really, as a coach. He had his period. I think you can make the case of whether it was propped up by Sean Edwards or not. But certainly in those successful years, he was getting results with his name above the door. I think he reminds me a little bit of if you look at football, someone like Jose Mourinho, who there was a time and a place for that style of play, and now he's sort of living off the reputation of those times. He was poor at Chiefs. He got moved on very quickly as Chiefs head coach and moved upstairs. Since he's left, they've had a market turnaround with some forward thinking and modern coaching. I don't see a situation whereby Wales, I think the argument is, do we have the money? But as I mentioned earlier, how much money are we losing from ticket sales, from competition revenue? In terms of just by keeping Gatland, I think eventually it would sort of cost neutralize itself if you appointed the right coach and then they took you somewhere and you recovered those revenues in future that you otherwise would have lost by sticking with Gatland.
Because he's contracted until the next World Cup and he's alleged to be on 600k. So the union are going to take a hit, aren't they? If they get rid of him now, they're going to, unless he resigns of his own accord, if he hands his notice in, which he did, let's not forget, after Italy. And Abby Turney turned around and said, hell no, apparently. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens next because there is a big decision to be made. James, I want to come to you because I don't know if you saw what Gatland said. There's something in the press conference that really caught my attention. He was talking about taking back control. Sounds a bit Brexity, I know, but he was saying that he wants more influence and potentially more control over the preparation and the players and with some of the structures. He's even talked about the issue of non-Welsh qualified players. So he said, I've been very consistent on the numbers of non-Welsh qualified players and whether we can reduce them. I'm a great believer in them because trying to get real world-class quality. They are aware of that and they're trying to put some of those things in place, negotiating with the PRB. What do you make of those comments there? Gatland wants more control over the players, over the prep, and he wants to reduce the number of non-Welsh qualified players.
Oh, he's just thick, isn't he?
That's it, is it?
He's just so thick. Because, he wants to get rid of the 25 cap rule, right? Which will open the door for more players or the potential for more of our higher performing regional and international players to leave Wales to go play in England, France, Japan, right? Then his idea is that will push forward then more young Welsh players to play for the regional game, thus creating a conveyor belt effect, right? But then what he's saying is that Wales is then churning out enough quality regional players to supplement the exodus of players that will inevitably happen, right? All four of us can go through our teams and categorically say, not necessarily who will go, but who will get offers to go. Right, and it's not to say everyone. I think a lot of I think we have a habit in Wales of maybe sometimes saying that this player will definitely go and play in France, right? I remember Alex Cuthbert talking. This is not to single Rio out, but Alex Cuthbert saying, you know, is Dragons keeping Rio that big of a coup because he might not, because the market that we're in, he might not have had that many offers, things like that. So in that sense, I get what he's saying. But if you scrap the 25 cap rule, you have to be consistent in saying then, right, let's bring in some quality non-Welsh qualified players to supplement match day squads, right? We all grew up watching our regions in the 2000s and the 2010s when we did have quality international players. You look at your Regan Kings, you look at your Marty Hollers, your Jerry Collins, your Xavier Rushes, your Percy Montgomery, all these different players, right?
Yeah.
That we watched growing up, and how many of them were influential in the careers of players who are still playing now or have just retired, right? Justin Tipuric raved for years and how influential Marty Holler was to him. Right? Imagine being a young seven, you turn up your first day and you've got Marty Holler as your training partner. Whereas now, and I'm using him as an example because he put the tweet out, you turn up and you see Sam Cross. Right? There's a different one, and Sam Cross is completely right in what he's saying. Gatland is focusing on completely the wrong things. And instead of saying we need to scrap 25 cap rule and stop non-Welsh qualified players in, no, actually, we need to invest in regional academies. We need to make sure that our young players are in the best state entering professional club rugby, so that when an Alex Mann or when a Harry Deeves or when a Tian Sparrow or an Evan Minto come into the senior setup, they are physically ready, they're emotionally ready, they are mentally ready, because they have played quality academy rugby. They've then transitioned into semi-professional rugby, which is of a high enough standard physically and skill-wise that they then can not comfortably slot in, but begin to slot in against your Connachts and your Ulsters and your Glasgows and your, if some people have their way, the Rotherham Titans and Amptils of the world, right? That's what we want, and you don't get that by scrapping the 25 cap rule and essentially banning non-Welsh qualifier players coming in.
Well, he said reduce. He didn't say ban. He wants to reduce the number.
But reduce it to what?
Well, he didn't say. He just said he wants to reduce.
Because you take it down from 25,
problem,
you take it down to 12, right? Okay, you play a Six Nations, a Summer Series, and a full autumn international, and maybe one or two other games, right? Then you can go fuck off and play for Leicester Tigers, right? And then you leave a massive hole in your professional club. What benefit is that to the professional clubs in Wales, right? And also another thing, why are we putting the English Premiership on a pedestal? Right? Why are we putting this league on a pedestal? Right? If anything, what it has proven for England is that it is not preparing players for international rugby in the same way that the URC does. They play against each other. They're not playing against other nations, other cultures, other ways of playing. They're playing against each other, right? Theo Dan has no benefit playing against Jamie George, his teammates, twice a year. Theo Dan would have much better playing against Bongi Mbanambi and Ewan Ashman and Ronan Kelleher, right? That's how, it's not the top 14 where they can afford to bring in myriads of different nationalities.
No.
So yeah, I think he's been thick. I genuinely do, and I think he's trying to save face by deflecting to another argument that he knows will get the Welsh not the diehards, but the general public fired up, because you'll get idiots who go online there and say, "Oh, but the 25 cap rule affects so many players." It affects what, one player now? Because Aled Davis has moved back.
Yeah.
Who does it affect? Joe Hawkins.
Joe
That's it.
Hawkins is the obvious one, isn't
And
it?
he's not the Messiah.
He's a very naughty boy, sorry.
Exactly. Well,
I know
that's
it's come
the
straight
joke,
to my head
that's the
straight
joke.
away.
But who does it affect? It doesn't affect Jared Evans, right? And I love Jared, right? But he's proven before that he's not necessarily an international player, or that can't control the game at international level. You know, who are we bringing in? Sam Davis. You know, I
He's
love
very
Sam.
well for Grenoble,
I
but
love
it is pro
Sam,
D,
right?
yeah.
Loved and want him to come back, but is he going to change our fortunes? No.
No.
There's
No, absolutely
yeah,
not.
that's my big rant about this fiasco.
Yeah, fair enough. Mart, Gatland wants to take back more control over the players and reduce the number of non-Welsh qualified. What are your thoughts on that then?
I mean, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm on the same page as James.
I thought he was going to say Gatland for a minute. It's like that would have been an interesting viewpoint then. Yeah.
What we need to do is focus on ourselves in our own structure below the regional game. We need to get these players ready now. You know, like I've already spoken about the dual shield. I got that in, but moving that to under 16 was a mistake. You know, there's so many different things that we should be doing, and expanding that academy system is the first one on it. I think there's a place, if you can do it properly and you can cap the actual wages players are on, as in, you know, make it just livable 30, 35. I think it's a case you could make the SRC fully professional if you supplement it properly with regional players. It wouldn't cost a great deal when you're looking at, you know, the amount of money that's spent at, you know, the actual professional clubs. You keep it to a minimum, you get a 30-man squad of 30Ks or whatever, and then you supplement it with 10, 15 regional academy players each. It can be done. So there are a lot of things we can do, but the focus should be on the under 23s. You know, probably from 14 to 23, that is the age category we need to be focusing on.
Yeah, you want a bigger focus on the age grade then. That's what you're saying, isn't it? Yeah,
100%.
fair enough. Yeah. Dan, I know you've been quite vocal on X about Gatland having more control of the players, and this golden share idea is something that you've strongly rebutted, isn't it? Why is that? Can you explain why to the listeners why you're against that idea?
I'm against it, full stop, but particularly from a Gatland point of view. I think you know, James mentioned hindsight earlier, and it is the most wonderful thing when it comes to discussing Welsh rugby. But if you look back at that golden period that the Wales had under Gatland, sort of particularly I think 2012 to 2019, that was a very special group of players. It was a one-off group of players, you know, to bring them through at once. What should have happened during that is that the money that the WRU made and the investment into the game altogether, it should have gone back into trying to produce another generation like that and continually building that cycle. Unfortunately, because Gatland is this control freak and likes to have his fingers in all of the pies when it comes to professional rugby in particular, everything got focused on giving that group of players in that Team Wales environment as much as they possibly could to achieve, you know, ultimately, I guess winning the World Cup was what he wanted to do, but certainly sort of be competitive in the Six Nations year in, year out, and get that group as far as they could. So what was underneath that was completely forgotten about. There was the WRU is incapable of big picture thinking. There's nothing there beyond, can Team Wales be as good as they can now? And that is why potentially there is a world where I think the golden share might be a decent idea. But if there's sort of competent people at WRU level and they show an actual openness and willingness to work with the professional clubs so that we all become successful together, that utopia does not exist, though, I don't believe. And ultimately, you know, everybody's in it for themselves at the end of the day. Everybody's too independent. So I'm against it because the WRU do not have competent people to build a strategy where everybody is successful, it will ultimately fail for all 5 teams involved if they were to take control, because Team Wales would continue to fail, and as a result, the 4 club sides would then fall with them, and there'd be nothing left of Welsh rugby. So I think then my other sort of controversial viewpoint then, which is probably not for discussion on this pod and probably deserves a full special wrap pod with you guys discussing it, but we've reached the point now where the way forward potentially doesn't involve all 4 club teams. It is very difficult to build a business case where Team Wales and the 4 sides can be successful altogether, because the WRU has plastered any sort of excess money that we had down the toilet. There is, like what Mar said about the SRC being pro there, that can't, but if you have 30 players on 30k at 10 teams, that's £9 million. We don't have that. We don't have enough money to run the professional teams properly. So I think Golden Share is a dreadful idea. It gives them more control to just run it down the toilet more. It needs a strong decision from the very top of the WRU to say, right, we're going in a whole different direction with potentially 3 independent club sides who are well funded, and they've got a budget that allows them to be competitive at club level, which breeds good enough players then to come into the test level and can win for Team Wales. But as I said, that would be a whole different podcast for another day. That's not something that you can.
What? Just to finish, I'm not going to dwell too much on what Dan said in terms of the Golden Share stuff, but what I will always say to the 3-team argument is, what is the evidence that 3 teams is going to bring Wales as a rugby playing nation more success than having 4?
I think ultimately it comes back to the competitiveness of the club sides. I don't see how Team Wales can expect to be successful when the players coming into it are constantly just sort of nibbling about at the bottom of the URC.
Okay, but what success has it brought Scotland?
No, and that's why I wouldn't go as far as 2. I think Scotland have got it wrong because they don't have the depth. I think 3. It's not an ideal situation. Don't get me wrong. This isn't. This is just a sort of symptom of where we are now. Unfortunately, is that we've for a long time I've been a component, a supporter of 4 teams, and that there was the money there to do it properly. I think that ship has unfortunately now sailed because of the continuing incompetence of the WRU executive. But I think 3 gives you enough depth in your national pool, whilst balancing being competitive at your club level. Just about. It's a fine line, but it's the best option I think there's there.
The other thing is as well, I think I speak for Jamie more than anyone here. It's really easy to sit there and say, I think that we should go down to 3 teams, knowing that your team will never ever be in danger.
No, 100%.
It's a fair point, Dan. Cardiff are going nowhere. Let's be honest.
I absolutely accept that. I think in terms of how you would do it, it would have to be some sort of bidding process. You'd have an independent panel with a set of criteria, and each 4 teams bid. And I would say, knowing the Cardiff executive, we could bollocks that bid up. I mean, we are very capable of doing that.
No offense, you're next door to the stadium. You ain't going nowhere.
But no, it is, and I appreciate that. It is unlikely that Cardiff would be one of those teams, and I stress this is that I don't like saying it. I don't like saying that we should go down to 3 teams at all. My preference would much rather be the 4 current teams be successful. But as I sit here now, I struggle to see a scenario whereby we get to that point now. There needs to be a dramatic sea change, and I don't foresee how we can recover revenue to the point where unless somebody knows a sheikh maybe, or that's what I would say. But yeah, it is an absolutely fair point. I am in a somewhat privileged position as the WRU's next door neighbour.
Yeah, this is a conversation for another pod, because we could talk about.
I just wanted to point out. I think really contextually important.
It was a very fair and valid point. I have to say the 2 teams idea, where I've seen a lot of people, I saw Andrew Coombs earlier saying East and West get in the bin with that bollocks. Where they're going to play.
Andrew Coombs can get in the bin.
No, he was a good play for the Dragons. I got a lot of time for Andrew Coombs, but he's always pushing this east and west idea. Where will they play? What will they be called? Who will support them? Nobody can ever answer those questions when I ask them about when they go down to 2 teams. And it's not done Scotland much good, is it? I know Glasgow are a very good team, Edinburgh good, but does it really benefit Scotland?
Bring back borders.
Borders, yeah. There's a blast.
Border Reavers. They had representation on the 2005 Lions still. I would just like to point this out. Right, Chris Cassiter. What a man.
There we go. Okay, let's look ahead to Saturday. Or not look ahead to. I'm not looking forward to it at all, actually. But Wales, South Africa, Saturday tea time. Kickoff is at 5:40. As Boris Johnson's advisor Dominic Cummings once said, I think we are absolutely fucked. Dan, do you have any hope at all for this game?
I have a Dominic Cummings anecdote, actually, that I saw him in a Holiday Inn by Gatwick when flying to Pau in December 2019 for a Challenge Cup game. But anyway,
random. But
yeah,
okay.
I know it was election night, and he was in a Holiday Inn by Gatwick.
Okay.
But anyway, no, I don't have any hope at all. To be honest, my only thing about the game on Saturday is that I just hope the Wales players come through unscathed. Like that's pretty much where we are now. I just hope that nobody suffers any sort of serious injury at the hands of the Springboks, who could well inflict some serious damage on a couple of those players out there. They'll give it their all, I'm sure, but I don't even think it's worth saying, if Wales do this and this, then they might stand a chance, because ultimately we just don't. I don't see anywhere where we can even have a dig at the Springboks on Saturday, unfortunately.
No. James, it's damage limitation Saturday, isn't it? I mean, I hate to be doom and gloom and negative, but
yeah, I think as a squad, but ironically, I agree with Gatland a bit here. The media are going to spin a narrative all week, right, about where Wales are, where they're not, what they're doing, what they're not doing, who's doing what, who's not doing. The players know this, right? The players are the ones in the heat of the moment, right? And this applies to anyone playing from all the way up in the Lions to counties for Hampshire, right? Is when you're in a rut, you're in a rut, and the last thing you need is people telling you you're in a rut. So the players know, right? And I have no doubt that publicly the players will be out there supporting their coach, and that might be how they feel privately as well. But what matters and what will send the biggest message is what they do on the field. It is what they're doing, going out and performing the game plan because they believe in it, or because they're just being told to, because they're getting a couple of grand match fee to do so. And I'm not saying these players are mercenaries, but when you're in a rut, the thing that's going to get you out of it is the want, right? And that comes from top down. That comes from your coach saying, lads, we are in the thick of it here. We need to get out together, right? I will lead you. Mark talked earlier about the lack of leaders. Outside of Dewi and Jack, I can't see who the leaders are in that squad. Adam Beard's gone now. Is Anscombe a leader really?
In the back line, but nothing.
But is he, though? Because is the back line being led by Anscombe? Because it didn't look like it on Saturday. Yeah, it looked like Ben Thomas was leading that back line.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to come to Matt, actually, because he's always the positive one, isn't he? Give us reasons for optimism there, Matt.
Reasons for optimism.
Even you're struggling now.
Stranger things have happened. I think we need some proper MI6 James Bond shit to get through this. I'm talking food poisoning, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., fire alarms, all the trimmings now. And even then, I think we're struggling. But like I said, they are good enough players. We can get a 15, just about a 15, that can do a job. And, everything needs to click. And even then, we are well up against it. But stranger things have happened. If Japan can beat them, why can't we?
I mean, That was a long time ago now, Hard, but yeah,
I
I
know.
get the
I know,
point.
but please, come on.
For me, though, it's we're lightweight and we're underpowered, and we've seen already this autumn that we can't cope with power. So I have no idea how we're going to stop these South Africans. We can see there's some more tries. How we going to cope? How are we going to stop that? I just can't see it. I can't see it at all. Let's talk about changes then. So there will be changes. Obviously, Adam Beard is out. Dan, what changes would you make? I suppose Teddy Williams comes into the equation now, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think Teddy's got a really good shout of coming in there, particularly looking at sort of what we lost when Adam Beard went off line-out calling wise. Teddy's called Cardiff's line-outs really well this year, actually. As a young guy who's just started doing it, it'll be a big step up to do it against South Africa at test level. Don't get me wrong, but
Just a bit.
yeah. And part of me thinks, there's a couple of guys like Kemsley Matthias, like Evan Lloyd, like Teddy, who you could say, oh, they deserve a chance to come in, but would you really want to come in this weekend necessarily? I'm not sure if that's a cap that I necessarily want. But every cap is great, but there must be a little thought in the back of the head that says, oh, maybe just a bit of tackle bag holding, and I'll go back to the club would be all right. But I think I imagine we'll see Freddie Thomas in some regard just to get him capped this weekend. I think. Smart money maybe says going back to a 6-2 if he can actually decide how he gets the backs covered done properly. Other than that, I thought what James said about confidence in the coaches, it was actually really interesting because, say about Anscombe, who probably is somebody who would go to bat for Gatland as sort of Kiwi mates and all that. But he looked really sort of the least confident I've ever seen Gareth Anscombe look on a rugby field on Saturday, which was gauged by how deep he was standing at first receiver. Didn't go to the line at all. That's not Anscombe. That his issue has generally been going to the line too much and sort of causing turnovers. So that is symptomatic of somebody who looks like they've lost confidence. Would I throw Costello straight in? Potentially not. I feel like that would be a bit. As a guy who, you can imagine the comments on the team sheet.
He's getting so much flack on social media, and it's just not on, is it? It's dented his confidence.
If he got named in that starting team and they announced it on Thursday, whenever it is, Wednesday, the comments would be an absolute shit show. I'd maybe think Ben back into 10, a bit more physical, bring Eddie James in at 12, bolster that midfield a little bit, give us a bit of chance of some sort of not physical matching, but not being physically flattened at least. Anyway, through there. Other than that, I don't think both of them was really good. Do you shift Christ to 6 maybe? And is he really actually? He's a big bloke in sort of stats wise. He's not really an enforcer at 6, so maybe you just keep both of them there anyway. Or Plumtree back in. Though I think that'll be the probably areas to look at what he does with 10, 12, 13, what he does with 4, 5, 6, and then bench selection as well, 6-2 wise.
Yeah, I'm interested to see the bench selection. I'd really like to see Eddie James get a start. I would. I think let's have a look at him. Why not? We got nothing to lose now, have we? And that's one player I'm very excited about. James, what about changes? I mean, Nicky Smith's made a really good case for starting, hasn't he?
All I'm just saying is we've longed to see Cameron Hannicum at the Principality Stadium, and we're finally going to, I think.
Fair point, yeah.
Just not in the jersey we wanted to see him.
Not the team we wanted him to play for. That's the problem.
Everyone says bring Nicky Smith in, but I genuinely don't know what Gareth Thomas has done, apart from if you rotate it for fitness-wise. I think Gareth
Thomas
anything
wrong. It's just that when Nicky Smith has come on, he's made a real
quietly really good autumn series. If you look at the numbers he's putting up for a lucid prop, it's fucking ridiculous. Like there is that, that really stereotypical old adage of you empty the tank, and if you're really empty, then we bring you off, right? He made 3 tackles in the first minute on Saturday. I mean, which says a lot about where Wales are as a team, but he's a lucid doing that. I actually don't think, I don't think he deserves to be dropped, but if you are going to, you bring Nicky in. I think you bring Evan Lloyd onto the bench. I just don't think Elias had the best game. I think, look, I've had my problems with Elias.
It was 5 attacking line lost, wasn't it?
And look, it's not all down to Elias, right? And
no, it's not.
But it is no coincidence that Dewi Lake and Beard going off made the line now exponentially worse. And look, Elias has been a fantastic servant to Wales, right? And he's had good club form this year. I don't want to see him and his legacy in a Wales shirt just be knocked and knocked and knocked. I think just bring Evan Lloyd in, give him 15 minutes off the bench, and then it just stops a situation like, look, Ospreys fans, let's be fair, abusing him as well as other regional fans. If you're going to put Ben in at 12 and Ben in at 10 and Eddie at 12, I think you have to bring in Owen Watkin at 13. I think it's just too much inexperience to go up against the Springboks otherwise. I think, you've got to have a defensive leader there. And if you're shifting Ben into 10, your 10 can't really be your defensive leader. And I don't know if Max Llewellyn is up to that yet. So I think...
What have you made of Max Llewellyn, actually?
I think he's had a really
campaign?
Mixed series. I think he's done some stuff really well. I think when we're at our best, it's him coming short, long. What I mean is that he's coming short off 10 or he's in the wider channels. I think what people have been expecting is to replicate his form for Gloucester and what he's doing for Gloucester. But what he's doing for Gloucester only works for them because they play in such a style. So I think he's had a mixed one. I might be being harsh in saying he needs to be dropped. What I'm saying is there's for me, if you're going to have Ben, Eddie, Max, that's a lot of inexperience to go up against potentially Andre Pollard, Andre Esterhazy, and Lucanio Am.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
And other than that, like, what changes can you make? Would you go Will Rowlands, Christians? Will
Rowlands hasn't been very effective this order. I mean, Dan mentioned it earlier. I think
he's hit the pastries hard in France, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's a lot of morning cappuccinos and, but he's experienced. That's what he is. He's an old head in that squad.
Yeah.
Rodri to start, maybe. I know it's a madness to say, but again, old
He was
head,
good off the bench.
leader.
Like I say, putting a lovely 50-22. I thought he did himself no harm at all. But I don't think he'll be involved this
But
week.
you're saying, do you bring in Hardy then? Good kicking option.
That's what I think he might do. Yeah. I wouldn't start Ellis Bevan. I wouldn't start him. But then did he go on the bench? I don't know. I was disappointed with Ellis Bevan personally, but
I think you keep Tom Rogers. I think again, there's no one else other than Cam in it. Maybe he brings in Rio. Just maybe.
I don't think he will.
It's bulk. So look, there is scope for changes, but how many we will make is another thing.
Yeah, that's fair enough. What about you then, Matt? What changes would you like to see made? Get all the Scarlets boys in, is it?
Well, this is always the fun point of the pod since I've been on, because I come at it from a completely different angle from you guys. And
yeah, because you want those Scarlets players involved, that's why.
I'll just spirit. Obviously, last 2 weeks, I've wanted a team that can stick together and will eventually go through to the Six Nations. I don't think either 15 we've saw in the last 2 weeks will be capable in that Six Nations. So it's really a point of looking at who is going to benefit the most from starting against the South Africa team. For me, we know what Thomas and Smith can do, in the front row. Put Matthias in this, see what he can do. Lake, again, I've already said he still needs more time in that starting jersey. I think that was his 10th start for Wales. I do agree with having Evan Lloyd on the bench, but I disagree with the fact of Elias's darts. There's one simple thing that happened in that match against Australia between Lake's throw-in and Elias's, and it's Australia competing. The more Australia didn't compete in any of Lake's throws in that game, and quite frankly, there was a couple.
To cut you off, what does that say about them perceiving Lake's throw-in to Elias's throw-in? Because if they felt they couldn't compete on Lake, it was because he was throwing very well. Because it was the same caller for both, because Beard was off the pitch. So what does it... That's what I'm not entirely putting the blame on Elias, right? Because it's not a fair thing to do. But the common denominator here is it was Elias throwing, and they targeted his throws. So that's what I'm saying is they didn't target Lake. So what's the reason for that? Because they could have.
And if Lake was on the bench, they would have. It's the fact that it's second half that we're all tailing off. That is the main thing. We started getting a bit of an ascendancy towards the end of the first half, so they changed it up in the second when they thought they would actually might come into a bit of trouble. But obviously it didn't. And even then, 2 of the lineouts should have been caught. A third was Australia jumping across. I mean, me and Hugh went back and forth with the 6 lineouts, and 2 of them were freaking awesome steals by Australia. You've got to give dues.
They were very good.
Yeah, a couple of good steals in fairness. Yeah, I get what you're saying, Mark. Yeah. What about you, Dan? Now with Evan Lloyd coming in, I don't know if you'd be too happy with that because Cardiff are down to the bare bones at hooker, aren't they? And let's be fair, his arrows are a work in progress to say the least, aren't they?
I was going to jump in and say that I think this comes back to what was the wrong selection at the start of the autumn, is that this should have been Brodie Coughlan for me.
Thank you, Dan.
No problem. You can have that one, the Drags, and then we'll beat you twice.
Note this day down, Dragons and Cardiff getting along.
But no, I don't. Evan Lloyd came off the bench away at Edinburgh for Cardiff 2 weeks before the start of the autumn internationals and dropped the most royal stinker of a line-out throwing performance you will ever see. He and that that's not necessarily a criticism of him. There's context to Evan Lloyd in that he's still barely 2 years into a conversion to hooker. He's he's a back rower. He's going to have time to adjust, and he's not going to be a top percentage line-out thrower still at this point of his career. But yeah, I think the only bright side would be that if they bring him off the bench is that on 60-odd minutes is that potentially the game might already be gone by then, so it won't particularly matter anyway if his line-out isn't 100%. But I do think it comes back to that this really should have been Coughlan form-wise as the third-choice hooker.
He did make an excellent line break, though, out in Edinburgh, didn't he, Evan Lloyd?
He's great on the park.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Marty, was you going to say something then before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, I think if you're going to look at a Cardiff hooker for Wales, I think you should be looking more towards Evan Daniel in terms of going towards the future. I think he's the more rounded player there. Obviously, Evan Lloyd has got the physical factor on that. But yeah, you got to look for me at who's going to benefit the most from playing against the big Safa side, regardless of result, because the result is not going to come.
Okay, fair enough. We're going to finish up very soon, but before we go, predictions. Go on ahead, Matt. What was your prediction for Saturday?
Wales by
South
3.
Africa by how many?
No, I'll go for it. You gotta try and back the team you're with, regardless, even if you truly believe they're going under by 100. And I don't believe they're going under by 100, or it might be close. I'll say Wales by 3 for shits and giggles. Go on.
Right. Okay, James.
Keep it under 15. You can go to O'Neill's afterwards. That's all I'll say.
I mean, the last time we played South Africa at the Principality Stadium, they did put 50 plus points on us as well, didn't they? So, there's that to consider. Dan, what are you going for?
I've got South Africa by knockout at the start of the third.
How many points do you think?
Yeah, I'll give the boys benefit of the doubt that maybe South Africa, after a long old summer or whatever season it is there, will sit up a bit in the last few minutes. South Africa by 30, I think.
Yeah, I was going to go for South Africa by 28, which pains me to say it, but we can't handle power. We haven't got the power to combat these teams. So, it could get very, very ugly. And that's a happy note to end it on, isn't it? On that note, that's a wrap, gents. Thank you, James, Martin and Dan, for joining me this week. We'll be back next week to pick the bones out of Wales, South Africa. But until then, take care and goodbye. Bye.
That was WRAP, the Welsh Regional Rugby Appreciation Podcast. Please rate, review and share us on socials if you can, and join us again next week for more of the same. And until then, enjoy your rugby.
podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.